Have you ever wondered what some of the most basic crochet terms mean? Do you have people in your life who crochet and you are just wondering what on earth they are talking about? It's as if they're speaking a different language. Well, guess what? Today we are going to learn some of the most basic beginner crochet terms. I'm going to explain them to you, and I'm going to go ahead and teach you what they mean and why they are important. And so that way, when you're talking to other crocheters in the crochet community or in your life, that way you can understand what they're talking about and you can grow in your own crochet skills as well. To get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and talk about specific terms and then define them for you. If you have never been here, welcome. I am Chelsea Stenberg. I am owner and operator of God's Gift of Creativity. I sell at markets and I've been crocheting for well over 10 years. And I am here to go ahead and teach you all about the basics. So, to start with, we are going to be learning first what some of the basic tools are and what some of the basic, just very, very basic terms and phrases mean. The very first one that we're going to go over today is the crochet hook. So this is a crochet hook. So this is one of many options. I also have some others. So you often will see metal or plastic ones. They're not specific for what they need to be made of. Some of them will have specialty handles. Some of them are all one piece. But a crochet hook in its most basic form is just a piece of material with a hook at the end. So they are different sizes and different widths. Mine is a 5.5 or I9 millimeter hook, or 5.5 millimeter hook, or an I9 hook. So this is about a medium width hook. You can get huge hooks or small hooks, but they are the very basic tool for how we crochet our projects. So depending on whatever you're crocheting, whatever type of yarn you're using, that will determine what hook you're going to use. But in its most basic form, it is just a piece of material with a hook at the end. The next thing that we're going to talk about is yarn. This is yarn. So this is just 100% cotton yarn. So this is a very small sample. So yarn is just spun pieces of fiber, and it can be very, very thick. It can be very, very thin. When you're crocheting, you don't necessarily need to use yarn. So I'm not going to say that yarn is one of those necessary crochet terms or phrases that you need to know, because you can crochet with so many things that are not actually yarn. But it is good to understand what we're talking about. So yarn can be made from many, many fibers. It can be made from acrylic, from wool, from cotton, plant-based. You have animal fibers. There's a very, very wide variety of fibers and materials that make up yarn. With that being said, some people will crochet with twine. Some people will crochet with plastic. It's very, very dependent. The whole idea is that you really just need a piece of string in some form, and that is what you're going to be crocheting with. Now, the crochet hook and the yarn need to match to a certain degree. If I had a very, very tiny hook and a very, very thick piece of string or yarn, that's not going to work very well. You need to have them match, otherwise they just don't, the hook won't actually be able to wrap around the yarn. So those are the basics of the tools that we're going to be using. Some sort of string, usually yarn, and a crochet hook. Okay. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is tension. Now, tension is not a physical aspect of crocheting, and the fact that it's not a tool, but it has to do with your hands. Your hands and how you hold the yarn, how you hold your crochet hook, and how tightly you stitch. So when you think about tension, I want you to think about when you are holding anything. Let's say you're holding like a stress ball. How tightly you're holding that in your hand and then you can kind of release it and still be holding it. You can barely be touching it with your fingers and still be holding that stress ball, or you can be clenching it super, super tightly and you're holding it. That's the same idea. With how tight of a tension you have on that stress ball, that same idea is going to relate to how you hold your yarn. So there's no necessarily right or wrong way to hold your yarn or how tightly you should hold it, but it will impact your stitching. So it's just a good idea to understand what it is in order to crochet projects correctly. So when someone's telling you to crochet a certain stitch, you're going to need to understand that you might crochet more tightly or that you might crochet loosely. And as a beginner, you're not going to understand that right now. I'm not asking you to. But I do want you to understand the idea behind it, that it's just how tightly or how loosely you crochet. Because as you get to become a better and better crocheter, it is going to make a difference. Now that you understand tension, we're also going to talk about the very basics for how to make a stitch. Now, one of the most basic directions you are going to have, or that someone's going to tell you to do when you are learning new stitches, is the term yarn over. So yarn over is a phrase that is just going to tell you what you're going to do with your yarn and crochet hook when you are trying to create a stitch. So you are going to put the yarn over the hook. That's literally it. Yarning over. That's it. So it might confuse you because you also will sometimes hear yarn under, which is going the opposite way. Now, if you're a beginner, you're most likely not going to hear yarn under unless you're doing amigurumi or other very specific patterns that are going to call for that. So for right now, you're going to go have your crochet hook under your yarn, and you're going to put the yarn over your crochet hook, and then you'll take the hook part and you'll use that to potentially pull through, and that is the next term. That is called chaining or a chain. So when you're talking about the term chain, it often will refer to a stitch, which is the chain, the most basic crochet stitch that you can create, but it will also refer to making a chain. So when someone tells you to chain 5, chain 20, they're actually telling you to crochet that many chain stitches. So when you're a beginner, that can be kind of confusing. So I just wanted to explain that it's both doing the action and actually the stitch itself. So to chain, you're simply going to yarn over and you pull through the loop that is already on your hook. And that creates one chain every single time that you do it. The very next crochet term that we're going to talk about is the stitch. So we talked about it a little bit when we're talking about chain. Chain is a crochet stitch. It's the most basic one. But when we're talking about a stitch, it's actually a series of steps that involve yarning over and pulling a loop of yarn or string through the loop that is on the crochet hook already. Now, the steps that you might take to create that stitch, or the series of steps that are involved in completing that yarn over pull through, are going to differ depending on what stitch you're making. And for many stitches, such as single crochet, double crochet, half double crochet, treble crochet, slip stitch, and many more. There's many stitches that have a standard, very uniform way of making that stitch. The 6 basic stitches are chain, single crochet, half double crochet, treble crochet, and slip stitch. Those are your most basic stitches, and those stitches are the basis for pretty much every other crochet stitch. There are alterations in how you might make those other stitches, but those are the 6 basic stitches that have a very standard series of steps. No matter who you go to in the community, as long as you are using the same country's crochet terms. So like right now I'm talking about US crochet terms. So if you were to go to the United Kingdom or to another country, you're going to have slightly differing set of terms, but the process is going to still be the same. So I just want you to understand that a stitch is basically you're just doing a series of steps and you're pulling yarn through the loop that's currently on your hook. So you might have more loop, you might create more loops in the process, but eventually you're going to pull through that loop that is already on the hook before you even start the stitch. The next thing that we're going to talk about is a row and a round. A row is a series of stitches. So when you are talking about a row, most often you're going to be discussing a row that is in a flat object. So for example, it could be a square, it might be a rectangle, it might be even just be like an abnormal shape, but it's a flat object that you are crocheting. When you get to the end of a row, that means you've completed all the stitches that are going one direction. That's it. You've ended that row. A round means that you're creating either a circle or you are joining the 2 ends of the round. So for example, if you were to create a flat circle, you are actually going to join the ends of the round. The other option that you could come up with is I don't know if you've seen a granny square, but a granny square is a great example of this, where it's not a circle, but you're joining the 2 ends, the start and the end, to create one continuous round instead of a row. The next term that we're going to talk about is turning. So when you are turning a project, you are actually flipping it from one side to the other. Now, depending on the crocheter or the person you're learning from, some people will turn it one way or the other. This also depends on whether you're right or left-handed, which way you're going to turn. Some people have tricks for this, but the basic thing that you need to understand is you're flipping from the way that you're working to the opposite side, and then you'll work back through the stitches that you just made. That is the basic understanding. You're just turning it over. You're not turning it sideways. You're actually flipping it from the side that's facing you, and you're going to work on the opposite side. All right, guys. So the next thing we're going to talk about is fastening off or tying off. Fastening off actually refers to you cutting the end of the yarn. It means you're no longer going to need to make any more stitches. You're not going to need any more yarn. So what you're going to do is sometimes when it's asking you to fasten off, it'll tell you how long of what's called a yarn tail. How much extra yarn do you need to finish the project? In that case, you're going to actually give yourself that much extra yarn and then cut at that point. Other times, you're just going to be told fasten off. And when you're told fasten off, you're going to want to leave yourself a few inches. You don't want to fasten off right there, because then you won't be able to do the very next term, which I'm going to introduce here in just a second. So you're going to want to make sure you leave yourself a little bit of room, because for the next term is weaving in your ends. When you weave in your ends, you're taking that yarn end or the yarn tail, and you are actually going to weave it using a yarn needle. You're going to weave it in between the stitches that you've made. So you're going to usually secure it with a knot, or what most often happens is you pull it through the loop that is on the hook. You pull the end through the loop on the hook, you secure it with a knot, and then you go ahead and you're going to take a yarn needle and you weave it through the in between the stitches that you have already created. If you need to know how to do this, I have a tutorial on my channel for how to weave in ends in the most very basic way. But that is the very last term we're going to go ahead and discuss today. If these terms are super helpful for you, if you enjoyed getting to have an explanation for how to do these things, please let me know in the comments, or if there are other terms that you think I should go over, I would love to hear from you, and I would love to help you out as much as I can. So go ahead and let me know in the comments what terms you would like to learn more about, and if there was a term that was new to you or one that you really enjoyed getting to understand a little bit better. So if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.